Julian Assange was sitting next to a window through which, if you stepped through it, you'd be arrested, deported to Sweden to face rape allegations. Why don't you just do what it takes to clear your name, given the importance of what this book is about?
Well, I'm glad you bring up that question because there's a lot of misinformation in the media. In fact, the situation here is that I have been given political asylum in response to a political asylum application, which all Europeans have the right to make. That political asylum application is in relation to a very serious, ongoing, pending criminal prosecution in the United States for the contents of this book. So there's 5 charge types involved: espionage, conspiracy to espionage, conspiracy, computer hacking, Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and general conspiracy. And that's an attempt to engulf not just me, but WikiLeaks as an organisation, those conspiracy charges. My alleged co-conspirator, Chelsea Manning, has been sentenced to 35 years in a military prison. Very serious situation. Upcoming appeal this year. Now, in relation to Sweden, there's a case that started in Sweden, completely paused for 5 years now, after the initial US case started. That case is formally at the stage of a, quote, preliminary investigation. There has been no movement in 5 years. I haven't been charged. I have already been previously cleared in that case. Neither Sweden nor the UK will promise to me or to the government of Ecuador not to extradite me to the United States. The UK says it will arrest me anyway, even if the Swedish case dissipates. And the UK also refuses to confirm or deny whether there's already a US extradition warrant for me here.
The UK will arrest you whether or not the rape charge sticks?
There's no charges. I haven't been
The allegation?
charged. That's correct.
But you're saying the UK has threatened to arrest you for the American side?
The UK says formally that it will arrest me regardless of what happens with Sweden, because it says that it was an offence for me to come in here in the first place when I was under house arrest.
Okay. And you basically could put us all out of our misery by simply answering the allegation in Sweden, couldn't you?
Well, for the past 5 years, it is Sweden who has refused to take my statement, refused to take it while I was in Sweden. I'm not Swedish, I'm Australian. While I was visiting Sweden to give it a lecture about the Swedish involvement with the US forces in Afghanistan, that's when this was initially made. I was cleared, completely cleared, and this case was then resurrected through the involvement of a politician, now notorious, Claes Borgström, after his intervention. So I offered my statement in Sweden, I offered my statement here. It's normal European process, and it hasn't occurred.
Let's talk then about the book. It details from an academic point of view, these are academics writing in it, what the impact of WikiLeaks was on US foreign policy and US diplomacy. And looking at it, the question just emerges, cui bono? Who benefited from WikiLeaks? And isn't it obvious from here that the people who benefited largely were bad guys? The Russians, the Islamic terrorists, the people America was fighting benefited from what you did. That's the allegation.
Well, there's an allegation actually that in terms of, we've published a lot of material, more than 10 million documents, now more than 2.7 million cables. The initial Cablegate release had 251,000 very serious documents, but we've now published 10 times that amount. No, it is an interesting question. Some commentators say that it has been the US that has benefited the most from the destabilization or attempts to change government that has occurred in the Middle East.
Because to be clear, you trace an element of a causal link between the release of the original Cablegate through to the Arab Spring, where people were using that intelligence as arguments for the overthrow of Ben Ali and for Mubarak. Yep.
Well, that's what academics do in Tunisia and Amnesty International and so on. The release of the cables potentiated a critique within Tunisia. Eventually, Mohammed Abbouzi came and committed suicide. That was the sort of the human spark that condensed it, and it started to spread. But they had very interesting effects early on in the Egyptian revolution. But if we pull back and think what we have a very interesting situation in world affairs where you have a popular uprising that frays the existing order within a country and create space for something new. Now, left to the domestic forces alone, that seems to produce reasonably good results. So we see those reasonably good results in Tunisia, for example. But when there's significant outside forces, organized outside forces, as there were in Libya, as there were in Egypt, attempting to interfere, well, those outside forces, NATO, for example, the United States, Saudi Arabia, they are already very organized. They are organized governments, and so they have an organizational capacity that a new structure that is trying to evolve, a new democratic structure, does not have.
So at one level, Cablegate describes a world where American intervention is faltering, certainly, for example, in Tunisia and Egypt. But if we look at Syria, and in this book there is a description of American attempts to destabilize Bashar al-Assad's regime right the way through the 2000 decade. Okay? Syria now cannot be described as a kind of textbook outcome of American diplomacy. It's just a hellhole. And only this week we learned that 2 British citizens were killed by a British drone strike. If you had the docs, the intel, on that drone strike right now, would it be in the public interest to release it in the way you released WikiLeaks?
Absolutely.
You would. So it would make future drone strikes impossible.
We'd have to see the actual material, but
if it falls into your lap now on a CD, what do you do with it?
Well, we get together, a bunch of experts and publishers. We do what we normally do and publish it.
Redacting what?
Well, our policy is we will occasionally redact material for human rights grounds, but only for a limited period of time. This is a very clear policy, and we've fulfilled it.
It might be clear, but why? You look at Snowden and the Snowden intelligence. This program, the program we work for, has used and seen Snowden intelligence, which we've always used in an incredibly redacted and, I would argue, responsible way. Why don't you do that?
Well, it's a question about responsible to whom. Now, through these cable publications, we have contracts with more than 110 media organizations around the world. And sometimes we do a regional issue, which just relates to one of them, but often there's material of global interest. And so we're able to compare the results across 110 different publishers. And what we see is extensive abuse of the redaction process for political purposes, because of fears of libel suits and so on.
The other fear, though, is that people who want to kill us are empowered by the unredacted intelligence. Isn't the argument well, look at you came into here before ISIS before the Islamic State existed.
Well, where did the Islamic State come from?
Okay, are you part of the do you believe America created it? Are you in that school
destabilization
clearly
in
by
Syria,
destabilizing Syria,
in Syria and in Iraq,
did
created
America
ISIS.
Create the Islamic State?
American destabilization, together with the destabilization provided by Europe in Syria and in Libya, together with the destabilization provided by US allies, Saudi, Qatar and Turkey, is what has created the Islamic State, and it is what continues to propel the Islamic State.
But it is a new fact. And to people sitting outside this building, they feel under threat by an Islamic State that is out to get them. What do you make of the argument that changes the game? That now it would be irresponsible to release. I mean, we know what happened in Iraq. It wasn't a total surprise to people that the Americans tortured people in Iraq. But if you were to give intelligence freely, unredacted, that benefited the Islamic State, what do you think people out there would think of you?
Well, there's no allegation that anything that we have published has benefited the Islamic State. Yeah. But let's go back. It's the failure of the press here to properly cover what has been happening in Syria has led to the rise of the Islamic State. That's a very, very, very serious phenomenon that the intelligence agencies have run amok, that military suppliers have run amok, that Saudi, Qatar and Turkey have run amok, and as a result we now have a situation where we have the Islamic State, where we have incredible refugee flows coming from Europe, where we have a human rights catastrophe. The human rights catastrophe in Saudi.
And surely, you know, everybody who's a Democrat has to choose which side of that conflict they're on. I ask you, which side of the conflict do you stand on when the Islamic State murders a gay man for being gay?
We wouldn't have an Islamic State if we had proper understanding of how foreign policy works in practice.
That may be true.
How it works in practice is it doesn't suit the interests, not even of the people of Syria. It doesn't even suit the interests of the West, because you have particular crazed factions in the West, various intelligence agencies, always looking to justify their budgets, always looking for a boy's own adventure, and as a result, we have the calamity that is the Islamic State.
Last question. The final balance of what you achieved with this, it's actually not that great. I mean, you didn't stop America doing the things you don't like it to do. You probably exacerbated the tension between Russia and America. We don't blame you for doing it, but it's clearly, it didn't help the Russians to read all the American stuff. What do you think you've achieved?
Well, if you look between states, actually something very interesting happens. There's increased understanding as a result. So I completely disagree about the Russian-American situation. There's cables from 2008 showing Russia talking about its red lines, showing that it believes there's going to be a civil war between East and West Ukraine, for example. And at the same time, the Russians can see what the American concerns and views are about Russia. That's documented in there, as is largely how the present situation in Syria came to be, what US involvement is in Europe, and the ICC, how the US has tried to subvert the ICC completely subvert the ICC under Bush and co-opt it in a more subtle way under Barack Obama.
These are incremental changes to the world order. Was it worth, we know that the case against Chelsea Manning is an allegation, it's the way you always describe it. Was it worth putting a US private into solitary confinement and detention for 35 years, even for what you think you achieved?
That's not something that I can answer. That's only something that Chelsea Manning can answer. That's only something Chelsea Manning can answer. But the allegation there is that he was betrayed by a US journalist. Nothing to do with WikiLeaks.
No, but WikiLeaks is part of the movement that wants to do these things. Is it worth it, given the human cost to you, to her, to Snowden?
That's not really, I don't think that's really a question. We have engaged in a very serious work. We have published an archive now of more than 10 million documents about history, but also about our present. Now, human beings and civilization can only be as good as its understanding of the reality that it has to make decisions about. So this is a very basic principle that people either believe in education, that education is important, or they don't. I'm someone who believes that education about how the world actually works, how human institutions actually behave, is really the only thing that we have. Otherwise, it's just a chaos because our decisions are not based upon understanding.
Julian Assange, thank you very much.